Welcome to the Empathic Mastery Show. I'm your host, Jennifer Moore, and I'm so glad you're here. This is a place where we talk about what it means to be highly sensitive and empathic, how this impacts all aspects of our lives, and we explore tools, resources, and solutions so we can shift from absorbing all the thoughts, feelings, and energy of the world around us to being beacons for calm, love, and healing. Welcome to the Empathic Mastery Show. I'm your host, Jennifer Moore, and I am beyond thrilled to be introducing my guest today. This is going to be a real special treat, you guys. So my guest is Chris Ann Donnelly. And Chris Ann is a Canadian artist, poet, and designer. And she is the Oracle and Tarot deck creator of not just one tarot deck, but a few. The Lightseers Tarot, which is absolutely beautiful. The Muse Tarot, which is also absolutely beautiful. The Tarot of Curious Creatures, which is really delightful and whimsical and fun. And the Sacred Creators Oracle, which is an incredibly helpful resource for business owners and creatives to work with their stuff. So, Chris Ann, I am thrilled to have you here. Welcome to the Empathic Mastery Show.
Yay. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I can't wait to get into it. So, as we always start at the very beginning, it's always about, where did you start? Did you know you were intuitive? Did you know you were slightly different? Like, where did it all begin for you? Tell us about you.
Okay. So I would say my intuitive gifts started turning on when I was very young, but I didn't know that's what it was.
Yeah.
I'm sure, a lot of people have that, right? I remember being very young.
Very young as in how, like what?
About 3, like it's some of my earliest memories, 3 or 4, and being in my room and hearing voices and hearing voices and hearing voices through the walls, and also seeing people in my room at night, or seeing people at my window at night, or I also had really incredibly adult-like dreams, where I was in an adult body and having experiences that a 3-year-old would not know about. Like looking down at my breasts and just having like dreams that were beyond what I should have been having at the time, like very young, and they were very challenging dreams, quite difficult.
Yeah.
And I was a very happy child, and I would be in my room and hearing these voices, and I have a very distinct memory of calling my mom into the room, or she came in, whatever it was, and I was like, Mom, like listen to the voices. And she's like, what voices? And I'm like, what do you mean you can't hear them? And I was like, no, come close to the wall. And I would hear like they weren't English. I know that. I would hear like it was like a whispering sort of, but I knew exactly what it meant. And I remember trying to get my mom to listen, and my mom, knowing her now, she was probably afraid of what I was saying, to be honest with you. I grew up in a house where those sorts of things were quite scary. And so I was always told that I was very creative. Oh, you're so creative. You have such a giant imagination. And so from a very young age, I began to kind of bundle what was intuition, what was creativity. And to this day, I will tell you, as I grew up as a creative artist, to this day, I still have difficulty kind of unwinding which is which. But then again, do I have to?
Yes. I want to just say, I have never, one of the things that you pulled out that I'm like, having kind of a mind blown is I never thought about the age of the dreamer in the sense of the experience being not age appropriate. And I completely understand what you're talking about. And I'm like, oh yeah. Kind of like probably most 9-year-olds weren't dreaming about like the redcoats invading.
Yes, exactly.
And so I'm just that was just one of those things where I'm like, oh, you just shed light on something that just, I think is so
Amazing.
Interesting. Yeah.
There's memory there, right? Whether it's like past life memory or genetic memory, cellular memory. I'm not sure in the ethers. Yeah. But I had dreams of being pregnant when I was like 3 or 4, and I was not supposed to have gotten pregnant. And so my father, who was like a leader of a village kind of thing, had me tied over a well.
Oh,
And I was going to have my baby and it was going to be dropped into the water.
oh,
And I wasn't able to have kids in this life. And I fully think now, looking back, that those very vivid and painful dreams, because it was very painful the way I was tied up. And I was in such grief about losing this child. And I think somehow that kind of became a part of my subconscious belief system patterns. I'm not sure. And yeah, very interesting, right?
yeah, yeah.
Like, that's just not a dream that a 3-year-old.
That is not a dream that a 3-year-old has. No. I think so often there's that period where the memories from previous lives are still kind of, still have more, like you can smell them more easily at that age, like, preschool, sort of like before we lose our baby teeth. I think there's more access to all of those. So I've definitely known other people where it's like they can really, there's a lot more recall, but what a scary dream.
Yeah.
And then I also wanted to, you comment at the other thing that I'm just like, is just that idea of the intersection between intuition and creativity, that dance between the two sides of that, and how it sounds to me. And actually, this is where I can so relate, because it was completely acceptable to be imaginative and very creative in my family, but it was not acceptable to be connected to the paranormal. And so I don't know if you had this experience, but there was also this way in which there was a conflating of creativity and imagination with experiences that were paranormal, and then turning it into, oh, well, you just have an overactive imagination. So that it was like a way to explain it. It was a way to justify it. It was a way to make sense of it, to keep it safe. But it also did this thing where it was sometimes, that thing of like, what's really going on here? Because there wasn't necessarily any validation or acknowledgement of like, no, you're talking to dead people right now, or you're having a memory of something, or this thing is coming up. So
exactly.
Yes,
I had that experience. 1,000,000,000%. I had that experience where it was, I'm sure, kind of confusing, to think, well, this is something that's actually happening,
right.
but my parents are telling me that it's not. So therefore it must not be real.
Right. Well, and I have a theory. I've seen this happen. And I actually suspect that one of the things that distinguishes psychics from empaths is that psychics often received some validation or had some kind of way to back up the experience as a young person. Whereas it seems like many of us who identify as empaths were basically told, you're too sensitive, you're overreacting, you're taking it too personally, you're making shit up. This is not real. And what I've noticed is that as a result, empaths often have struggle even into adulthood with trusting our gut, trusting our intuition, and believing, like knowing that the information that we're getting is accurate, because we were so gaslit and so invalidated. Out of the hundreds, if not thousands, of empaths that I've talked to, that I've interviewed, that I've had really deep conversations with. And I know I've said this, and listeners who've been here a long time know what's coming next, but I can literally count on one hand the sensitive people who were not told that they were making it up. Like 5, maybe 4, 5 people in everybody who did not get that invalidation. So obvious, which kind of leads us into the conversation about intuition. So at what point did you realize, like, wait a second, I'm having a different experience than everybody else is having?
I think it wasn't until I was a teenager and I had an interest in, I wanted to go to the metaphysical shop, and I would sneak in there because I wasn't actually allowed in there. And I had an aunt who was very psychic, and she was a registered psychic where she would get called, and she worked with like the government and the university here to solve crimes. Like she was one of those people that we don't really know exist, but they do.
Yeah.
And when I was a young teen, I found that out. And I didn't know that when I was growing up and I was younger. And then I had an experience where my parents were driving home, and I think I was probably 15 maybe. And they were driving home. It was really snowing out, and I didn't know where they were. I got home from school and I called them and I said, I think maybe you are driving on the highway coming home from this mall and you can't go on the highway. And sure enough, that's exactly where they were. And between them leaving and getting home, there was like a massive 40-car pileup on the highway. And that was like it was like the first time that I had validation from my family. Right? Because I'm sure there were lots of instances, but we kind of, imagination, like it wasn't as dire as that. That was a life or death sort of, or a very extreme consequence.
Yes.
And so I think that was the first time that I can remember where I was validated publicly.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And that made a big difference in my understanding of, okay, there's something here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there is something, that validation, I think, is such an incredibly important part of developing our intuition and our psychic abilities, and also being able to trust what we're getting. Because without any feedback or data, it's like, what's my imagination? What's my emotional crap? And what's actually information that I'm getting that's really important? So the fact that you had this experience that was so concrete and was so verifiable, I'm so glad. I mean, and hopefully your parents listened to you.
Oh, they did. Sure. They did not. They were like, oh my goodness, how does she know we're here? And we're not driving on that road.
Oh, thank goodness. Thank goodness. Yeah.
But it was, and because my dad had that experience in his family, I suppose, but my parents didn't really talk to me much about it because in all honesty, when I was younger, my mom was quite afraid. Like she grew up in a kind of old school Catholic, right? So she was afraid of that stuff. Now she has come a long way. Like she's amazing. She edited my first edition of Sacred Creators Oracle. I mean, she's on board.
Yeah.
In the 80s, she wasn't.
Right. Exactly. Well, and I think for many people, it does take a while to just kind of get to that place where we can soften and trust that it's going to be okay. And thank goodness. I mean, I know for myself, like the only people who were intuitive, the only people, like we were weirdos who were going into the metaphysical stores and things like that. You mentioned your aunt. And that, so is this a thing in Canada that you can actually be certified as a psychic?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think she just had some sort of connections, and she was just, I have no idea about that.
Okay.
I should ask my cousin.
Yeah. And is your aunt, is she still alive? Or
she's
is
not.
She?
No, she's passed.
Yeah. So did she see you as a sensitive and take you under her wing at all? Did she give you any help?
I am the 52nd grandchild on that side. So there was a ton of us. So I didn't see her all that often. But I do remember her when I was probably 12-ish or 13-ish, inviting me downstairs into her. She had this basement library and she had all of these metaphysical books. And that was kind of my first like, oh, look at all this stuff. So she did in her own way. Definitely open the door for me.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. So that was the first point, that going back to the 40-car pileup, that was the first experience of, okay, I've got this ability. I have some concrete evidence that this is real. I'm sort of imagining that there was a bit of an in-between from that to being a creator of 4 Oracle tarot decks and living the life that you are living now, where you are not only a creator of decks, but also you are, the one thing I noticed in your bio that's missing is that you also have taught many other people how to work with their brand and how to helping other people to put their work and their creativity and their spark out into the world. So, you're doing amazing things. let's talk about that in between place for a second or two.
Yeah, it sure didn't happen like all at once. That's for me. I went to school and I studied graphic design as I was, as an artist, and I loved art and my imagination.
Yeah.
And then I moved to Chile for love. My husband's from Chile. And so when I moved to Chile, I could not work in design in the same capacity that I could in an English speaking country because I was getting by in Spanish, but I didn't understand the culture in the same way to be really, you just can't do really good commercial art if you don't understand the culture that you're working. Right?
If you're as a graphic designer, I mean, it's so language based and it's so nuanced in terms of understanding the little teeny tiny jokes and subtleties. Yeah, I can't even. Yeah, I totally if you were a portrait artist, that might have been one thing, but as a graphic designer, it makes complete sense that would have been very, very hard.
Exactly. Yeah. So I started online, very, very early days online, where I began working with English speaking clients. So I kind of started this design business, kind of sink or swim, really. I don't know if I would have been an entrepreneur otherwise, but I wanted to be in Chile and I wanted to work in my field. And so I began a graphics and advertising agency. And I had that for a very long time. And near the end of that, like 18 years, I did that. And near the end of that, the last 4 or 5 years, I really started doing more consulting, the strategic consulting side of the branding. And then I did a lot of one-on-ones and also me going into corporations and doing their think tank kind of sessions. And what I started realizing when I was doing those sessions was that, especially for the small mom and pop shops, not as much corporate, but also corporate, there was a definite use for intuitive tools and bringing in a more intuitive understanding of the brand or of the company. So I started to bring Oracle decks into my strategy sessions. And that was before Oracle decks were as well received as they are now. So some clients loved it because they had this chance to say the things that were in their heart or in their unconscious, really, right? Because I'm like, why are we branding for what you think? Can we work on what you know?
Yes.
Can we work on branding where you're headed, even though you're really afraid to admit that you want to do this thing that you actually really want to do, right? Yeah. So I found that your Oracle cards were super useful in this kind of business setting where people would give themselves permission to say the thing. In corporate too, right? Because people wouldn't say something maybe in front of their colleagues, but then it's the card is saying it.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes. Yes.
So I found them really useful. And then that was when I began to think about creating an Oracle deck for business because I couldn't find one. I kept buying all of these different Oracle decks. How many Oracle decks did I buy trying to find the perfect one for these strategy sessions? And I just couldn't. So then I thought, maybe I'm supposed to create this. And then that was when I really started to shift my business away from other people's businesses to my own products. And it was such a joy, oh my goodness, to start making something that wasn't for someone else.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the Coles notes.
So what was it like? I mean, you mentioned that you started bringing the Oracle decks into these consulting sessions and helping people to access their truth in a way that allowed them to speak things that maybe they felt wasn't it was their heart, not their head, as you were saying.
Right.
But what I'm wondering, with your background as coming from a family that was that's not real, that's not happening. You're just got you girlfriend, you got one hell of an overactive imagination. What was that journey or that process like of kind of coming out to yourself as this mystic? How did you embrace your intuition? How did you embrace becoming an Oracle deck creator?
I think I knew that I was using my intuition at work a lot because I would end up sitting with people in strategy sessions and then saying, oh, you told me about this and this, but that other project that you want to do, I would just say it. I'm like, don't you want to write a book? And because I wouldn't, and they'd be like, what? They'd be a little bit taken aback. So or whatever it was, or what about that one manager that's, whatever it was that showed up. And so I started to embrace that because it made the process better for those that were willing to accept it. And it made their brands better. It made their businesses better because I just had a little more insight in a way, you know what I mean? And it wasn't that I had the insight. Maybe I just had more insight into them because they were sitting in front of me. I'm not really sure, but it worked. And it was a thing, though, for sure, when I was creating the Oracle deck for business. I actually think that that's probably the reason why I created that deck first, because it felt safer. It felt more conventional, because I could say to my dad, it's for business, you know,
right.
and explain it that way.
Yeah.
Where, you know, when I started doing just the tarot decks, it was a little more, oh, why do you want to do that? You know, like, there was a little more of the confusion around why is it not connected to business strategy or branding or design, because it was a full turn from what I had been doing, what I had been building for so long. That may have happened if I just wanted to do a turn into anything, you know, that's possible. Yeah.
So, and it makes complete sense in terms of the story that I'm just looking up, actually, literally at the box of the Sacred Creators Oracle. It's like right up in front of me over there, or one copy of it, because I actually have more than one copy of it. So, yes, you were saying like that, you could still justify that. You could still kind of like explain it within your niche. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that transition, or like, what was it that allowed you to say yes to really like going off road?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's a point, I think, and this happens for probably almost every mystic that makes a business out of it.
Yes.
I think there's a point where the angst that we feel of not either following our dream, or the angst that we feel of not being ourselves in the world, becomes more painful than the risk of what other people will think. Right? There's this moment where it's, you know, it's almost like for years and years, you let it build, for many of us, to the point where it's like, I cannot be in the world without sharing this anymore. That was my experience, you know, trying to hide it, trying to opaque it for so many years because it was different, or, you know, insanely vivid imagination, you know, like whatever. My biggest worry for so long was that people would think that I was crazy. That was my biggest, like, for me, that was the thing. It wasn't not being understood. It wasn't not being liked, which is another thing. But for me, the worry about showing up in this way was that people would think that I had just lost it, you know?
Yeah.
And I think I just got to the point where I also made an effort to surround myself with people who understood it and who understood me, and, you know, where I could be 100%, I'm just going to do this and I'm going to talk to you about the whole thing, and people that were supportive of it. And that made a huge difference too, you know, to find your network of like-minded people so that they get it. And you realize I'm not the only one like this.
Yes, totally. You just said a mouthful in terms of like the fear of people thinking that you're crazy. I think that really holds back. And I mean, the heritage, the history of this, like there were so many times in the last, I mean, for the last couple thousand years, but I mean, I've certainly heard stories about from a number of friends and clients and colleagues about, you know, the crazy aunt, the one who ended up institutionalized because she had the weird dreams and everything. Like, it's a legit concern in our culture that when we let that out, especially if we have any kind of, and I think I'm sort of led back to the very beginning of what you and I were talking about with your child, you know, that early 3-year-old dream of being pregnant in a community where they basically tied you over a well. And I mean, you know, the consequences of being different were much more serious. For, you know, I mean, we only now, it feels like, really within the last maybe 50 years, has it really shifted where being this way does not necessarily mean jails, institution, or death.
Right. And I think that there, I mean, there's definitely a shift because there's so many more people that are open to different forms of spirituality or different forms of psychic or intuitive gifts. But as a culture on the whole right now, it's like we're doing these two things. We're shifting away from that. So that's okay. But we're also living through a time where the online space is a space where if you stick your head up, if you say the wrong thing, there's also severe consequences to that, or what seem like, almost, but yeah. So,
Yeah.
so we're just, it's like it's going away, but it's evolving.
It is evolving. It is evolving. Well, and it's like the energy of cancel culture, the energy of we will punish you if you don't comply, if you don't oblige, if you don't get along. It's like it's no longer a death threat, but it is still, but it's like so much of our existence has become virtual that there is still that sense of I could perish I could perish if I do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing. But then on top of it, it's really striking how now you're kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't, because it's almost inevitable that you're going to have people with one opinion and people with another. And it's like, how do you navigate this? I've seen this, especially with Palestine and Israel. People are so polarized, even within this new age communities and the alternative, transformational entrepreneurs. There are people who are absolutely pro-Israel, and there are people who are absolutely pro-Palestine. And then, the people I tend to agree with are the ones who are like, killing children is wrong, period, which is where I kind of land with all of this. But it's fascinating to me to see these people who then start policing and judging other people because of the way they say it. So as you're talking about that, just the risks.
Yeah, I think that there's just that compound, if you come from a background where you were worried about being judged, or if it's genetic, or if there's like the witch wound or whatever it is that you carry in your system, while the mainstream is becoming a little more open to our intuitive gifts, it's certainly not more open to being different. And so that becomes, it's just an interesting evolution.
I'm so there with you. And the other thing I've noticed, because, you and I've both been on this path for a long time. And, I created my tarot, like I self-published my tarot deck back in like 97. And at a point where it was just a completely different world than it is now. What I've really noticed is that with the mainstream popularity of oracle decks and all of the, the fun, fluffy, crystally things, is that there's also a way in which it has become very commercialized, and it has become legitimized because now it is commodified. Now it is something you can purchase. And it seems to me like, I don't know, scrolling TikTok, scrolling Instagram, but especially like that there are definitely like people who sort of, you've got this whole division of sort of the spiritual influencers, but it feels like it's kind of, I don't know, it's still a popularity contest. It's still you fit the mold, you wear the cool boho hat, you've got the pretty crystal crown. Like there's a way in which it definitely fits into that idea of, are you fitting in? Or
Absolutely.
are you really just weird? Yeah.
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 It's true. It's become more commercial, which is great for in so many ways. That's going to happen as people are more accepting and more curious.
Yes.
And I think I'm so happy about that. And it also means that when we have this massive influx of new people into any industry, the industry shifts slightly, right? Yes. That's the way, it was, I always feel like there was like 100 people in the room, and then all of a sudden there was 10,000.
Yes.
So then the culture around our industry shifted as a result. And so there was much more, like we're going through this beautiful evolution, this beautiful flourishing, where we have a lot more beginner stuff out there than we have in a long time, which is really cool, right?
Yes.
And a lot of people that are kind of in the first 5 years of their exploration, which is also amazing. So I almost feel like excited to wait for the world to kind of catch up and then see what happens. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like because we've been in this industry for a long time, you notice the big shift, right?
Yeah.
The last 10 years has been just a tsunami of difference,
Yes. Yes. And this renaissance of creativity, or even maybe not even it's this explosion of creativity, this explosion of, and I think just so many people being called to write the book, to create the art, to make the oracle deck, to make the music, to speak in light language, like so many different ways that people are all, it's really quite exquisite to see all of it. Yeah. Yeah.
It's going to be, I mean, what is going to happen as a result of all of these little drops? Like, I feel like they're like little pebbles in an ocean. It's going to be incredible. 10 years into the future, the amount of gifts coming online. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens.
Yes, absolutely. And I think also that in 10 years, there's going to be, my suspicion is that right now we're at a point where there's like a great deal of content creation, like almost to the point where it's kind of like everybody is just produce. But I suspect that what's going to happen is there's going to be a point where we're going to start coming back to what is the value in this? What is the quality of this? Like, is this something that matters to me that I really want to spend time and energy and I just want to commit to? But I want to be sure that, I could talk with you about the creativity industry and just this path forever. But I do want to talk to you about something we talked about before we turned on the recording, which was the experience of being a physical empath and the idea of different kinds of intuition, because you were mentioning that as you studied, this is another thing that Chris-Anne did. Chris-Anne is, if you guys haven't figured this out, Chris-Anne is a little bit understated about her accomplishments and about the amazing things that she does. Because in addition to all of the things we've been talking about, she actually went to acupuncture school and studied to become an acupuncturist. And so I would really love to hear about being a physical empath. So Can we open that chapter or open that door? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. I went back to school in 2021.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to take a little bit of a creative sabbatical. Not that I wanted to, it's just that being an empath and being so sensitive with the state of the world in 2020 and 21, I reached summer 2021 and I felt like I had no creativity for the first time in my entire life. I mean, I'm like creativity on tap, on flow. It comes out of me through a million different ways. And I didn't have anything.
Yes.
So I thought, okay, I could sit here and wallow, or I could go get more creative ingredients, which is what I suspected I was doing when I decided to go to acupuncture school, because I wanted to learn. I was interested in the energetics of the human body and the way energy runs through us, and it's kind of a different way of looking at the world. And acupuncture has this beautiful map of all the meridians, and I wanted to understand it.
Yeah.
So I went to school, and I went to full-time school, like college with young college kids. And, some semesters it was 5 days a week. And in my program, we had to do 500 hours of clinic where we were treating patients for 500 hours. And so during my time treating patients, my intuition had an incredible shift that I didn't expect. I had, when I was first treating patients, I got all the visual information. I usually get information like visual in my mind's eye, like a metaphor or an image, a very specific image. And I was getting the images, but I found that when I was getting the images, when I was treating patients, I was overwhelmed because they weren't there for a reading, and they were there for physical ailments. And I was so in my head trying to figure out what point was for which thing and where was it and how deep the needle had to go, and all of those, like it's just a lot of information that you need to synthesize in a short period of time, that I said, actually for the first time, I said, Spirit, like, can we just turn this down? And this is after a lifetime of being like, turn it up. I was like, turn this down, because it was just getting in the way. And it was also getting in the way of me being able to properly hear patients, because they'd be telling me about their physical ailments, and I would hear something about a fight they had or their drug issue or whatever it is, and these things that were not a part of the session, right?
Yes.
So I asked for it to be turned down, and it went away.
Oh my goodness.
Which for me, exactly, right? Because if that's your way of sensing in the world, it's your way of, it was pretty extraordinary to have that happen, right? Where I would sit with them and I was like, okay, I'm not getting anything. And I thought, okay, I'm not good at acupuncture. I felt for a while like I can't figure out what they need because I was trying to rely on these old gifts that I asked to have turned down.
Right.
Right. And so my intuition changed. It went from it went from like this visual thing. And probably third semester ish. I'm not great with time. I think it was about third semester. I was touching a patient on his back, and I immediately got the sense of his emotional feelings, where I felt like, because, you're spending a lot of time. I'd never worked on bodies before in that way. So it's like spending a lot of time feeling for muscles and bone and like ligaments and this kind of thing. And I was trying to feel for muscles, and I felt his sadness. And so I had intuited people's sadness before, like sitting across from them at a table, or like, I kind of feel a little bit, I know they're sad, or I feel a little bit of their sadness, but I never had the same depth of the pain of like, I didn't know that someone's grief could be this deep. Yeah. Right. It was, but touching people, it just was so different, right? It opened up this whole other faculty, which was also overwhelming. So I also asked to be taken away. I spent about 3 weeks with that, and 3 weeks driving home from school, crying in my car for like the hour and a half on the way home, because I was just like, I need to purge this. Yeah. And I'm not sad because of anything, but this, I just felt this intense pain. And then probably fourth semester, fifth semester, it started to change, where it was an extraordinary journey. It started to change fourth, fifth semester, where I started to, rather than feel their emotions, I started to smell things, which maybe from the TCM or traditional Chinese medicine perspective, it makes a bit of sense, because you're smelling a little bit of metal, or you're smelling a little bit of sour. But then I also had things that were florally, which didn't fall into that at all. And it was interesting. I was interested in that because it didn't affect my emotional register at all, right? Yeah. But it wasn't useful. I started to log it. So by the end of my program, I had like, okay, maybe this type of thing smells like that. So I've got a few connections that I've made. Like, I know that people with electrical issues or Parkinson's maybe smell a certain, I had my own dictionary that you start to create, just the same way I would if it was a visual metaphor, right? But it wasn't until the end of my 500 hours, like 470 hours sort of thing, like just at the end of my program, I started to feel their pain in my body. And that became useful. Not nice. Not nice. But very useful. But useful. Right? Yeah. Maybe that was a little bit earlier on when it started, but it just got pretty intense. It got to the point where I was sitting down and taking intakes with some people, and it wasn't with every patient. It was maybe, I'm going to say 20% of patients this happened with. They'd sit down and I'd be doing their intake. And before they even tell me, I'm like, okay, my knee is sore. I know they're here for their knee. Right. So it was a really, so that became a useful tool. And eventually, just at the end, it became more of a feeling it with my hands. So it wasn't as much in my body. It was like almost like I had to learn how to deal with my body was cycling through senses is what it was doing, because I didn't want their life story. I didn't want their emotional pain. And so for a while, it was just, I guess, it was almost like this exploring and testing. And looking back, when I'm saying it out loud, it sounds like this fantastical journey. When I was in the moment at school, it was actually more like there were moments I almost quit, because I was like, my teachers can't help me with this. I'm experiencing pain. I'm taking their pain home. Maybe I can't do this, Right. That was my worry in my head. Yeah. Well, and I think, you're describing my trajectory and my journey as a healer over the course of years and years and years. And going from that, you're just getting these you're getting these downloads, and you're getting more information, which acts, is interfering with your ability to be of service. But like, I can so relate to everything you're talking about sort of starting with the head and the information and kind of like that intuitive psychic stuff. And then as you start laying on hands and you start working with people, that absorbing all the physical pain, feeling it in your body, and then kind of being like, and then going to that place where you sort of have this kind of detachment, but it's not necessarily that helpful. Just like all these different ways. And then coming to that place where you go from, at least for me, the journey from being fully immersed in it, like where it's like you've been learning through immersion, Yes.
to sort of learning how to be standing at the shore and recognize all the things without drowning in it, without finding yourself processing it. And I think that that is something that as empaths, it's, that ability to know and to sense and to pick it up is one of our greatest gifts. But it also is so overwhelming when we're more processing the information as if it's our own. And so, I mean, what I'm struck by is how accelerated your journey was, like that you went through this process as a healer that many of us spend, like it takes decades to really fully grasp it and to journey through it. And it sounds like within from 2021 till now, I mean, we're just at the beginning of 2024 as we're recording this. Yeah. It's like that's a very short period of time to integrate all of that material. And I mean, what a miracle, considering how hard I'm sure it was, that you kept showing up. You kept doing it over and over, that you graduated.
Thank you. And I think though, I mean, I think about this accelerated timeline. I also had a lot of tools, right? I also did my grounding. I also had my meditation. I also had the past understanding of bubbling and protecting myself and eating chocolate if I needed to or whatever. I used all the tools at my disposal.
Yeah.
And I had years and years of understanding that these things could happen in different ways and having access to other people that I could ask for, it was, I think it's almost like I had been learning it without actually learning it in a way. And I'm going to explain that because I think we, as someone who was definitely empathic prior, as far as what are people feeling, it just became more intense when I touched them.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? So it's almost like I probably had spent a lifetime already dealing with this, but just underneath the surface.
Yes.
So I don't know if it all happened at once, but it definitely reared its head that I needed to really figure this out or else I could not continue. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've known people who thought that they wanted to become massage therapists and started to do started doing the work and laying hands on. And they were like, I can't do this. And so, I mean, it is something, that experience of when we first start putting hands on people, I do think it is significant. I mean, I love Zoom largely for that reason. I love the fact that I can tune in without necessarily having that physical interference. So, I mean, knowing how to navigate it is definitely, it's such an important part of it.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not sure if I will work full-time in acupuncture, and I'm sure that's the reason why.
Yeah.
Because when I finished school and on my reading breaks, I realized how good I felt because I was still somehow, I wouldn't feel the pain for as long, but I was still, I'm a little bit too porous.
Yes.
That's how I'm going to put it.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because it strikes me like you and I both work with a meridian healing technology. I use EFT, you use acupuncture. And what I'm struck by is acupuncture doesn't necessarily have anything within its system that helps to clear the vessel of the acupuncturist. Whereas with EFT, what I love about it is that because I'm tapping along at the same time that I'm working with somebody, I'm clearing all of the energy systems are getting cleared within my system too. So I don't tend to take on and carry the stuff in the same way. Right. So it's almost like with acupuncture for people like you and I, it's like, how do we find a way to acknowledge all these things, but allow the information to flow through as opposed to stick?
Yes.
Isn't that the perennial? I mean, that's the $1 million question, really, right there. Yeah.
I mean, there is the, within our program, we were taught to go and meditate or do Qigong to kind of bring more energy into our body. And there's certain ways that you can eat to do that as well.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I ended up doing that I found useful at the end, I'll share it with you in case anyone that is a healer is listening.
Yes.
I found that I actually what seemed to work as far as like an off on switch was when I'd have a patient come in, I would just look up the chart, see what their name was. And then I would just imagine neon light with their name. And I would like physically pull a fake string that I imagined in my mind's eye. Then they're there. Then their energy can be there. But when they left and I turned that light off, everything had to go with them. Yeah.
Yes. 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 And I think you just said something so incredibly important that I think that, as highly sensitive people, we need to understand that we're allowed to say, okay, you need to go home now. Like that, because I do think there's a point where socially conditioning, for whatever reason, many of us get into this thing of thinking it's our responsibility to hold on to the things as opposed to be like, okay, that's great. We've had the session. Now we're done. Bye-bye.
Yes.
And just that ability to be like, you get to go home now is so incredibly important. Well,
there's also in a lot of ways, and it's something that I've dealt with with other things in my life, where we also cannot want something, right? We cannot want to have that feeling of their pain, but there's like a secondary gain to it because on some level it tells us, oh, I'm important. I have this ability, and isn't this cool? Right. So on some level, we must be accepting of it in order for it to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I was with the last round of Empathic Mastery Academy. We were talking about the first part of it is empath identity and really coming to terms with what are the perks of being special? What are the perks of being too sensitive? What are the perks of being the person who can help people? All the rewards that we get from it. And I think it's so important to own the parts of us that are enamored of it.
Exactly.
It's just so important. So, Chrisanne, I mentioned to you that I was going to say to you, oh my goodness, I cannot believe how fast the time has gone by. I promised I would say that, and now we're here. And so I always want to be sure to ask the question, what else? If there was anything that you absolutely would just kick yourself if you did not share in this conversation, what else? What do you really want to be sure that the listeners hear?
That being sensitive is so beautiful. And I actually think that this is a human gift that so many people shut off and they protect their hearts from because they are sore or angry or whatever it is. And so, allow that gift to flourish. Yeah. It's going to take you places.
Yeah. So just, embracing our sensitivity instead of running away from it and avoiding it.
Yeah.
And something you said way back of just the point where the angst of not following our dreams is greater than the risk of what others will think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of comes back to embrace our sensitivity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And also, at the end of the day, if we don't, the only person we also hurt is ourselves, because you know what I mean? Like it is a healing journey to really embrace it.
Yeah.
But it's such a beautiful and worthwhile journey.
It's such a beautiful and worthwhile journey. And I also think, one of the things I've noticed in my travels is that everybody has a freak flag. It's just some people hide them way better than other people do.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I think that the people who have the courage to be sensitive and the courage to be vulnerable and the courage to be authentic give other people permission to do that. Mm-hmm. And it's like, if we keep policing ourselves and other people, it's just such a sad thing, because when we say, I'm sure that there are so many people who are better because of you and your willingness to create and all of the amazing things that you've done. And I have no doubt that you've given many other people permission to be the colorful, curious, creative, wonderful person that they are, because you said yes, you embraced your creativity. Yeah.
That's such a nice idea. I hope that's true.
I know it's true because I know people who have benefited from your decks, and I know people who I know it's true. I know it's true. So I do have one question for you about your creativity, because you were saying back in 2021, and boy, howdy, can I relate? I think I ended up going to graduate school at a point where I just stopped being an artist. I went to graduate school and I was just like, done. Like, I'm going to let myself not be an artist. I'd been an artist my entire life. One of the best things in many ways that happened, though, was that by letting go of the identity of being an artist, I got to come back to it in a completely different way. So I'm just curious, has your creativity come back? I'm imagining it has. Yeah. And what kinds of things are you working on right now as a result of that?
Well, it's interesting. When I finished school, it came back in a really new way. In November and December, I was finishing my last course, and I have always done meditations, but I wanted my own meditation background track. So I started making music, which I've never done before. So that was like, I think that is it's like a side effect of having used these new kinesthetic feeling skills and more paying attention to the physical than the ethereal or what was in my mind's eye. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of fun. And I wouldn't say it's exactly the same as it used to be. Maybe it never is, right? It feels a little bit different now, but it has come back, which I'm very grateful for.
Yeah.
But my full productivity and my desire to work all day, every day on it has not come back. Which is actually
probably really healthy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like you were saying you really imagine yourself possibly like working as an acupuncturist part-time, and maybe you're doing some of the creativity process and creating part-time. And it's the perfect marriage where you get to honor both sides and have that happen. So at this point, I want to take you on do the exercise we always do at the end of the session of the episode, and that is a time traveling exercise. Okay. And what I like to explain is that, podcasts exist in perpetuity. They exist on a server for a very long time afterwards. We're recording this in 2024, but it's very likely that people are going to be hearing it in 2028, maybe even in 2035. And the thing is, maybe even longer than that. And what I really believe is that there's a way in which podcasts have a way of touching other parts of time, that podcasts exist like a ribbon that folds over on itself in time. And not only does it go forward in time, I believe that podcasts have an ability to send a broadcast back in time. And so what I want to do with you is I want to go back or send a message back. We're going to take that ribbon and fold it over on another point in time. And we're going to give a message to Chris Ann. It could be sometime in the past. It could be sometime in the future. But I love to go back or forward, but I love to go to the place where Chris Ann, your soul needs the message. Sure. So my question is, when, where, who are we going back to or forward to? Where are we going? And then what are we going to say? What are you going to say? And I love the idea of not like I would tell her, but like I want you to imagine that we are there and you are telling her exactly what she needs to hear.
So I have two in my mind and I'm going to speak to them both. Is that okay?
Perfect.
I have the one, Chris Ann, whose creativity was lost and she was totally lost in that. And I have the other one who was in her room and really confused because we talked about it earlier.
Yeah.
Who didn't understand that her imagination was not real.
Mm.
So I'm going to talk to the first one first. You just want me to just talk?
Talk right. To her. Yeah.
All right. Your creativity is going to come back and it's going to be different, but it's going to be amazing. And just trust that your time at school and your time away will take you where you need to go.
Mm. Trust that your time away and your time at school will take you where you need to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and to the little girl. I know that these things seem a little bit scary, and I know that you are really confused right now. But I want you to know that you're safe, and that you're safe in your body, and that you are going to grow up and you're going to have an amazing life where you get to use all of these gifts.
You are safe. You are safe in your body. You're going to grow up and you are going to have an amazing life where you get to use all of these gifts. Chris-Anne, this conversation has just been so rich, so delicious. So I could talk with you for hours. And I have so many, there are so many things. I'm just like, I want to ask this question and that question. But I was like, no, stay with the plot. Thank you so much for being here. It has been such a delight.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah. It was really nice. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, so good. So good. Okay. So now, final question. How do we get in touch with you? How do people find your decks? How do people find your awesome stuff?
You can find me on my website. That's www.chris-anne, so chris-anne.com. Or I hang out a lot on Instagram, and my username is Pixie Curio, Pixiecurio.
Yes. And you have your Instagram is so lovely and is just so delightful and such just such a ray of light in this world. And, the other thing, obviously, I believe Hay House is carrying a number of your decks, so people could pick up decks. I'm imagining, can they order decks from you directly, or
they can, or at Hay House,
and at Hay House,
Amazon, or Barnes and Noble, or wherever they look for decks, probably.
Excellent.
Or ask your local metaphysical store, because they
metaphysical store. Yes, very much, very, very likely. Yes. So you guys, all of these pieces of information will be in the show notes. And if you are out and about and driving, and you're not just right there and you can click on a link, it's easy in terms of, you can certainly just go check out Chris-Anne's Instagram at Pixie Curio, but also you can come over to empathicmasteryshow.com, where you'll find the notes, you'll find all of the links, and you can go and check out some of Chris-Anne's awesome offerings. Thank you again so much for being here. I really appreciate it. As we come to the end of this episode, I'd love to hear what you're taking from this show. Please jump over to empathicmasteryshow.com to leave your comments. In the show notes, you'll find a link to grab your copy of my Empathic Safety Guide, 3 Basics for Finding Calm in the Eye of the Storm. And while you're there, please subscribe and follow this show. And thank you for your help sharing this show with the people who need it. Please help me to spread the word and send this podcast to friends or family members who need support living as highly sensitive empathic people. Then join me again when the next Empathic Mastery Show airs. Okay, one last time. Hop over to empathicmasteryshow.com for your Empathic Safety Guide. And until next show, shine on. We need you and your gifts here on this planet. So please don't judge your empathic rainbow by colorblind standards.